All right. Let's have a quick word of prayer, and then we'll introduce ourselves and get going here. The Lord be with you. Gracious God, thank you for the gift of this technology that enables us to unite across many miles and many time zones and in different contexts and places. And yet we are connected by you, and we are connected by this gift that allows us to meet and to do things together. And so as we contemplate the gift of technology, the opportunities it presents, the challenges, we give you thanks for folks with some expertise like Scott, who can help us to better understand things. And so we ask that your Holy Spirit would be upon us in this hour, that you would enliven us, that you would strengthen us, and that you would help us to learn and grow and be open to ways to connect others to the gospel. All this we ask in Jesus' holy name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Well, Scott Lyon reached out to me, a couple months ago. He had seen an article about Central Lutheran and then realized we had some alma mater connections. And he and I chatted about what his new venture, Solace VR, is up to. And he is working in a whole bunch of worlds that I have heard said on like the radio, things like the metaverse and crypto and blockchain and all sorts of things that are in our world, but yet I don't know if we always really understand that and what the implications might be for us and for the church. So I appreciate you all joining me. Thanks for taking my invitation. And Scott, I'm going to hand it over to you and let you introduce yourself and take it away.
Sounds good. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it. And it's great to connect with all of you virtually. So I'm the founder and CEO of Solace VR, and we are 100% focused on sort of providing what we call digital tools and virtual community to not only help with next generation faith seekers, but also, forward-looking or reforming religious communities like yourself. My background very quickly is as a technology, marketing, business development. I helped start up cars.com. I had leadership roles at Sony, Los Angeles Times, Bank Mobile, largest mobile bank in the US. And I became interested over time in being a digital guy, a digital native, if you will. Why is it that there wasn't a similar level of digital engagement and touch points around spirituality? I'm like, what's more important and pervasive than that? And yet there's no Amazon, there's no Netflix, there's no Airbnb, there's nothing really. There's just a bunch of, kind of disjointed random websites. And I was like, this seems to be a real problem. And so I started up Solace VR to fix that. And since then, I've had the fortune of talking with literally hundreds of not just individual, consumers, if you will, faith seekers, whatever, but people who don't know what belief they are or think they know or whatnot. But also, maybe more relevant to this conversation, a lot of different religious leaders, right? So, as a result of that, I can do some pattern matching. And what I'm going to share with you today is some of the findings and insights from talking with, many of them. And, I really want to make sure that, today that the conversation is very open, very informal. There's no dumb questions. 2 weeks ago, I had a woman on a deacon board ask me about the iPhone and whether that was a good thing to get. Like I've gotten them all, right? So Zoom's hard, right? So, and according to my research, churches spend 1.7% of their total budget on technology. So they're not trained in it. They don't have the staff. They don't have the infrastructure. Why would they understand how a lot of these systems work? So if I'm cruising along and I say something that doesn't make sense, just, feel free to raise your hand. Like I said, today is informational. So I thought before we go into, metaverse or crypto or anything like that, I thought it would be helpful to talk about it. And I'm going to play back language that I've heard from talking to rabbis, ministers, preachers, deacons, board members, etc. This is what they tell me when they think about new technology and new initiatives. This is what they think their strategic goal is, what problem they're trying to solve. So I'm going to pass these on to you. We'll call it without judgment. I'm kind of using the language that I've heard from them. This is not my list. This is me being kind of a journalist, if you will. And I just thought I might, in a few minutes, see if any of those resonate with you, because if they don't, then that's a different conversation. If one or two do, then I can kind of customize the discussion around things that I think kind of address that. But if it's okay with you, Eric, I was hoping to share my screen here. Can you guys see this list with the yellow highlights?
We can see it. We're good.
Okay. So again, this is sort of, what might technology represent? Why are we doing this? Why is this conversation important? Is it important? Is it relevant? And these are not in order, but these are just things that I've heard. And again, it's sort of a way to calibrate and see if these things resonate with you. So the first thing is, when people think about technology like this, they use the word disruption, and they say, hey, I've been running my business a certain way for, in some cases, decades or even centuries, and I'm fearful that technology may blow that up. When I was in college, I used to go to Tower Records every Friday night and get the latest physical CD. That was just super fun. There is not a Tower Records anymore. It does not exist, right? It's been blown up. It's been disrupted, right? And so now you stream it, you go on Spotify, you go on Amazon, you go on YouTube, wherever you go, Apple, whatnot. So one reason why people are interested in technology and think they need to understand it better is because they're concerned that it will blow up, particularly post-pandemic, the existing kind of traditional service model of church. That's one point. The second point is, flip it around. It's that it's a massive opportunity, right? Like, think what it was like, to be in Manhattan in 1864 or Vegas before there were buildings and casinos, and you're looking out there, like there's that one mobster movie, and they're looking out there, and you can kind of see this desert, and you're like, well, how is this going to be a thing, right? And now it's this, thriving thing. So there's this sense that like there's an opportunity now to attack and go on offense and use technology to create new churches, new church models, new church paradigms, right? So that's a massive opportunity. That's another way to look at it. Another one, the third one, which I think is interesting, is this idea of community and trying to understand whether not only community could be redefined in a virtual environment or a digital environment, but could be enhanced, right? And so I have had pastors say to me that when, for example, people text them or email them, they confide more, they share more, they are more revealing than when they come to them in person, right? And sort of, if you extend the metaphor, IRL meaning in real life, if you extend the metaphor, the idea is, hey, we all have our guards up in the real world, but maybe in a digital world, we'd put our guards down more, be more Brene Brown, if you're familiar with her, seen her YouTube talks. And that would allow us to reach more interesting kind of spiritual altitude, if you will. So we can come back to that if you want. The fourth one is an innovation test lab, which is basically, hey, if I want to try something out, let's just try it out. And I don't have to buy a new building to do it. Like, one of you, I forget, was mentioning some different ministries, might have been Nathan, but hey, if we want to have like a happy hour or a demographically targeted meetup, or we want to have like a prayer vigil, like I have a demo I could show you of that, we can do that, and we don't have to have all the brick and mortar to do that. I've talked to ministers that are doing things with schools, with catering, with coffee shops, with upskilling, with weight training, right? Like, so all these different ways to try and create value and entanglement. And so the idea is, in a virtual setting, Those are things that you can test and learn very quickly and frankly very cost effectively without having to do them in kind of quote unquote the real world. 5 is basically, you know, hey, how do we get younger? How do we replenish the gene pool? You know, look at your kids, look at what they're doing, look at the amount of time they're spending on TikTok or Snapchat or whatever, right? In the future, you know, people are going to be kind of coming in and out, and they're not going to even use these words, right? They're not going to say, okay, now I'm about to go online, or now I'm about to go into a virtual environment. You know, they're just going to go, right? It could be augmented, it could be virtual, or a lot of different ways. And so for some people, it's sort of an answer to a hard problem, which is how do you reach and engage these millennials and Gen Z? And then the last one, 6th one, which I think is really interesting, some of the more progressive churches are thinking, you know, hey, we've got to train and onboard the next generation of leaders, and digital ministry is a really interesting way to do that, right? And so I am seeing now job descriptions for something called an online pastor. I'm seeing models where churches share an online pastor, right? And so it's sort of an interesting way to empower someone younger in their ministry before they, you know, take on full up, you know, responsibility of kind of a broader church community. So that was fast, but I just wanted to do kind of a quick Rorschach test. Again, that's sort of words from people like you, that's what they're interested in. That's what they're curious about. These are the kinds of things that have their gears clicking. So I thought before I go off on anything else, I'd love to just stop and take a breath and say, did any of that make sense? Outrageous, interesting, intriguing? What are your thoughts?
Scott, I was a part of George Fox, part of their semiotics and future studies cohort, and our weekly meeting was in a Second Life space designed for this. I had great experiences, and this is 12, 13 years ago, and Second Life has matured a lot more. I still have a Second Life account and go on occasionally. I love this idea. 12, 13 years ago, the church was so far from even being able to have this conversation. I'm thrilled that there's somebody pushing this out there and having this conversation. I think this is fantastic. And I think you've got a mature ecosystem as well. The tokens, the personal check-in, all this. I mean, this is really, really cool. So I'm very interested in what you're creating and the implications for the church.
Thank you.
I love this. Love this.
Thank you. And Second Life they were real innovators, right? They were way before their time, and they learned a lot. I've talked with a lot of people from there. I've tried to hire people that worked there because of how much they learned, right?
I wondered.
And you know, tried to grab their technology refugees and whatnot, but there's a lot of really cool current stuff where Philip and others talk about, kind of reflect on kind of what they see now. It's a really interesting conversation. I'm happy to try and find a couple links for you, but basically saying like, what does the current world look like through the lens of someone that has like 12 years of Second Life scar tissue, right? So it's a really interesting conversation.
That is. That's great.
My question would be how, and it's coming a little doubtful point, how to make this accessible to like all layers of the society, and not just based on age, but based on economic situation.
So you mean all layers? You mean like rich, poor, male, female, you know, not just
mainly the rich and poor kind of.
Yeah. It's a really good question. It's a big problem. They call it the digital divide, and it is real. It is a big problem. Even if you look at right now, if you look at like global smartphone and global internet usage. Like there's a lot of people that don't have internet usage in smartphones, right? I mean, it's not in the Bill of Rights, right? There's a lot of people out there that don't have that, right? So it's a real problem. One of the ideas I have is called I've called it a Solace VR lending library. But just like sometimes in little neighborhoods, you walk and they have like these little like bird pantry almost things, like little things where people can kind of for free put in books and for free put in food, and if you want it you can take it, if you want to leave a book you can, or whatever. One of the things I thought about is that it might be an interesting way for, you know, an individual church to basically like buy a few headsets, buy a few phones, buy a few, you know, devices. We can talk about how much and what that is and what's involved in that, but basically have that on demand, so that anyone anytime could basically come and sort of borrow it for a week, just like you borrow a library book, right? You know, and the point would be, to your point, to kind of broaden the exposure and access to that, right? The other thing is that I've actually gotten some feedback that some people do sort of kind of pop-up ministry at senior citizen centers and nursing homes and things like that. And they've gotten requests to leave behind technology because the 60, 70, 75-year-olds, whatever, they want to be able to access the programming from a remote site, even though they're immobile or physically challenged or ailing or whatever it is, right? So I do think that there's some interesting opportunities to kind of open it up, but this is a challenge right now that the whole technology space is frankly struggling and not doing a very good job of.
Yeah, following up on that, I know when I visit our more remote congregations, I have, like, a couple weeks ago, I was out in Lockney, Texas, small town. The nearest big town is Plainview, which is 10,000 people. And I was trying to do show a video as part of my presentation, but their internet was so bad that I couldn't do that. And that's not uncommon as I visit those congregations. They're the ones who would benefit the most from something like this. And I know you don't have the answers to that, but just an awareness that sometimes it's not even a matter of poor and rich. Sometimes it's just a matter of where people are located. But and just what, you know, it was interesting looking at that list, and boy, most of that makes so much sense to me, especially the generational piece. But I will say that the one that surprised me was the pastors who say that people are more likely to confess things to them through text and email than in person. That's the last place I would ever think about confessing anything to anyone is through a text.
Okay.
That I have a hard time believing that is the case for many people.
Have you ever found yourself saying to someone when you're having a text exchange, have you ever found yourself saying, hey, let's get on the phone, let's just talk this through?
Yeah. Okay. So all the time, because I hate text.
Right. So I think that for some people, text is for grocery lists and superficial chit chat.
I'm running late. I'll be there soon.
Phone is real, right? Whereas, like, when I talk to my 16-year-old, you know, he calls me link guy sometimes, right? Link guy, because sometimes I will dare to send him a link to an article or a video, and he's like, Dad, really? Like, I have to go and click on a link? Like, you're slowing my roll here, right? You know? So I think for some people, again, I'm just kind of playing this back. I would have thought like you, but I hear it quite a bit. People say that there's this sense that they can hide behind the technology, be a little more digitally adventuresome.
If I may, it's not even generational. It's the same psychology that allows people to say such ugly things in social media. It's the same thing.
Yep, that I see.
The same thing. There's this sense of protection. And so people do say things, I think, that's surprising. So it's a really, really fascinating insight.
Yeah, it is interesting to see.
Yeah, Sam Harris, if any of you are familiar with him, he talks about this. He says that he's like stopped doing Twitter because he gets bombed on there, and he's like, I know people would not be this nasty to me if they were sitting next to me, in a building somewhere, right? And so he's had to turn it off because it's just polarizing and toxic and whatever. So, and just a technical point, Chris, just to kind of go back to this issue, and we can talk more about this in a demo format so it becomes more real, but basically in the future, people will not have, they won't just have an avatar. They will most likely have multiple avatars, multiple digital representations of themselves. The CEO of Goldman Sachs is an accomplished DJ. He's almost gotten in trouble with his board for being too accomplished to DJ. So you could imagine this guy saying, hey, here's my Goldman Sachs CEO face, but on Friday night, here's my, I'm rocking out DJ face, right? Which could be different and could be true to him at that time and in that environment, right? So some people say that this idea of being able to flex your personality based on mood, moment, environment, whatever, that may also open up some more open, revealing dialogues, if you will. Again, for better or for worse. We can judge it or not, but that's so theory goes. Will, what about you? Thoughts?
Sorry, I was on the website and then I pushed spacebar and it went down. So I resonate with a lot of what you're talking about with technology and its benefits. And I see all that. I guess my curiosity is more about the virtual reality component of this. That's not something that I've had a lot of experience with. I don't have a VR headset. It's not something we've dealt with technologically within the church. So how does the VR world interface look like, interact? Is it similar to what I would know or understand from other internet interactions type of things?
Yep, good question. So Eric, if you're okay, I have a quick demo that has proven to be remarkably effective in like 10 minutes. I can zip through and show you guys, I don't want to use jargon here, but show you like what we would call 5 different like use cases, right? And I think it will make it a little more real because these are sort of, they're not customized to you guys yet. We could do that, but they'll illustrate the different modes and models. Maybe to Will's point, if you're okay with that, or do people want to?
Great. Yeah. No, this is
okay. Okay. All right. So let's do that again, because I think I can talk about metaverse. It's 3D, it's pervasive, it's immersive, it's experiential. I can use words that make you sound like the Charlie Brown voice, right? Or I can show you, and I found that in the past, it's much easier to sort of show, and then people go, wait, what's that? What's that? What's that? How's that work? Or whatever. So let me just kind of go back to sharing and pull that up real quick. You guys see this where it says future of church?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just breeze through these, but after each one, I'll just stop real quick in case you have specific questions. And again, that's the goal of this demo, is to elicit questions and feedback. So feel free to shout out any thoughts or reactions. And basically, I'm going to go from sort of the most conventional, conservative, kind of, practical, if you will, to a little more kind of daring, interesting, adventuresome stuff. So the first way that people are using this or could use this in sort of a spiritual environment would be sort of like, 3-dimensional Zillow for church, right? So this would be a way, you know, you could put this on your website, you could put it on my platform, you could put it in your emails, whatever. This would be a way for someone that is interested in checking out your physical environment. This would be giving them a more immersive 3D view of what that looks like, the way you might have a Zillow 3D home tour. So this one is, I'm going to show you the exterior, and then we'll show you an interior so you can get a feel for this. Okay. And again, I could have customized this if I had assets, and if you guys, you know, want to work more closely on some of these stuff, I can absolutely customize this around things that are more real to you. But this, for example, is an iconic, historic 300-something-year-old church in downtown Boston, Copley Square. And so basically, I'm kind of zooming around here the way you might if you were in a headset or on a device or even on a website, right? So you can access something like this from your phone, from your computer, from your laptop, from a headset, you know, different ways. And so it's just a little more real because like, oh, wow, that's really cool. There's a big building next to it. Okay, I'm getting the feeling that I'm in a city. Or, you know, oh, okay, there's a puddle on the ground. I guess it rained. I better take my umbrella if I'm going to go see it, right? And so this is, again, it's just the exterior environment. And I did this myself. I am, you know, not a professional photographer by training, but I used a VR camera and I took this picture. So we could absolutely go to any and all of your buildings of interest and sort of take this kind of picture where people could sort of spin around and kind of get a feel for it, like a Google Street View. Any questions on that one before I show you an interior view?
Maybe you answer this and I stepped away for a moment. Is this does this have an ability to be live? Like if, say, we were having a Sunday morning worship service, could we stick one of these in the sanctuary so they could see who was there, type of thing?
Yep, so we're not there yet. That's view number 3, which is coming up. So this right now is sort of a static picture, but it's a 3-dimensional picture, right? So at one moment in time, I clicked on the button of the camera, took this picture, and that allows me, the way I'm moving around now, that allows the user, I should say, you know, to kind of see what they want to see in a more lively way. So hold that question, and in 2 clicks, I'm going to show you an answer to that. So let's go to interior, just so you get a feel. It's the same kind of thing. Again, like sort of if we went inside the church, how might that look like? This is a church out in Arizona that is one of those sort of, you got to see it to believe it, which is why I used it, because it's kind of unconventional. It's up in the beautiful mountains of Sedona, Arizona. I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but you can sort of see, you know, it's very different, right? Sort of, you know, not necessarily what you'd expect, right? So again, I could curate this with you. If you said, for example, hey, like I've had people come and say, we've just opened up a new, you know, we just spruced up the nursery center. We fixed the organ. We, you know, opened up a new, you know, prayer room or something like that. Or I just want to take someone and cruise around the inside of the church so that they can see building by building, again, using a Zillow metaphor, what it looks like. So people feel kind of safe, comfortable, reassuring, and then they can say, yeah, you know, that looks like me. That looks like the kind of place I'd be cool. Let me go check that out. Does that make sense? Okay. And then now let's go to answer that question. So I call this sort of hybrid church or hybrid synagogue, but really it's kind of like, have any of you ever done like a Netflix watch party where you've like watched something or played a game like Twitch or something like that, where you've viewed content with other people in other environments? So this is sort of like that. Basically, this would be a way for you to say, hey, I'm already doing the Sunday morning service. I'm going to not only capture that and stream that on YouTube, Facebook, or whatever, but I'm also going to have a virtual reality camera added to the mix. And that's going to allow me to do something that's more, you know, kind of three-dimensional, more immersive, whatever. I think in this demo, it's two-dimensional, not 3D, but we could get you a 3D version. But basically, people could then gather digitally and sort of watch it as if they're there. So let me show you an example of kind of what that would look like. This is a synagogue, but again, it could be any type of environment. So here, I'm going to back up. So this is a real person in real life at one moment in time. She's singing. And while that's going on, other people are gathering digitally, right? And each one of these people is what we call an avatar. So you could say, you know, hey, I want to sit in the front, move around, do whatever. We can talk about kind of how that would work. But this would be a way for people to sort of gather before, share observations during, gather after, but they don't have to physically be there. They don't have to physically be there in order to quote unquote be there. Does that make sense? So that's what we would call sort of a hybrid service, where people are gathering and watching and engaging and interacting digitally, but it's on the backbone of a real world in-building performance or ritual, if you will. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so Scott, so those folks who are there virtually, like you said, they can pick where they want their avatar to be, then they can interact with other avatars.
Yep, so that...
Boy, that cantor is not doing a very good job, or hey, I like this song.
Yeah, good question. So the rules of engagement would be set by you. I would empower you to set those rules. So if you said, hey, these avatars can like fist bump and do whatever they want before, but the second Eric goes on, everyone has to kind of mute or something, we could control that. I know I've done it where, like, I showed up, Eric, like 20 minutes early to a service, and there were like 18 avatars, and everyone was just kind of cruising around virtually. And, you know, you could sort of message each other or wave your hand and introduce yourself or something like that. And then once the service started, everyone just kind of chills out and watches it. But you could imagine different settings where you'd say, for example, maybe I want to have, like, you know, a Bible study, a chorus. You know, you could have different things where you might say, I want to lift the restrictions, or I want to deepen the restrictions, if that makes sense. And the means, by the way, the means of which you can interact with each other, those you can set too. So if you say, for example, hey, if someone's avatar, like, looks interesting to me, I want to be able to say, you're interesting, let's connect virtually or whatever, right? I want to be able to message you virtually, right? So there'd be a mechanism to sort of do that, if you will.
Cool. Well, I know some of our congregations and these pastors know this, but you know, when they do their stuff on Facebook, they get interaction between people who are on Facebook watching it in a different way than just a live stream where there's no interactive tool, but that's still very static. So this is another step up. But yeah, you don't want it to be crazy.
For sure, yeah. Okay, so now let's go do something a little more adventuresome, which I'm calling a virtual only service. So now what I'm going to show you is this is more like Second Life, where it's more of a virtual environment. We would design it. I'll show you an example. It's an outdoor environment, but we could customize that. And this is only happening in a virtual setting. The only thing that's happening here is being driven by the people, the avatars that are virtually participating. There's no physical corresponding companion service, if you will. So this is outdoor. We've done a lot of research. A lot of millennials and Gen Z, they find spiritual, uplift and consolation from like outdoors, forest bathing, nature hikes, things like that. But, and again, we could customize this. This is just an example. We've been doing stuff with the Episcopal Church, for example, and this is an example of an outdoor service. So if we wanted to, we could say, hey, and I'm going to kind of back up here so you could see, hey, I am seeing this, and now I want to come in closer. Or move left, right? I can move left, move right, whatever. But this could be a virtual worship service. You could have a liturgy here. You could go through and say, and now I'd like all the avatars to pray with me, essentially. So you could replicate what you do in the real world, or you could do things like I'm about to show you in a second, maybe differently than you do in the real world. But this would basically be sort of virtual church, if you will. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay. And then the last one, really quickly, that I'm interested in, because we have a lot of religious institutions that are very big on community service and social impact. This one would be sort of like a digital prayer vigil. And I think, if I remember right, this one is like, what if a church memorialized like the X year, in this case, I think it's like two-year anniversary of George Floyd, or, people, some churches will do things in the wake of like Uvalde or Buffalo or things like that, unfortunate tragedy where the community needs a collective response. Well, in this case, that collective response could be virtual, right? So let me show you an example of what that looks like, right? Sometimes it freezes up because Zoom, oh, there it goes, okay. Let's try it again. Sometimes Zoom and this don't always get along. Let's try it one more time. So here I am, outdoor setting again. Research says people like doing things outdoors, but if you were going to do a community vigil, you would very possibly be outdoors too. And so this is like, what if we wanted to kind of come together as a community and, memorialize some event, like in this case, George Floyd. So I've created a platform here where you can sort of upload content. So this quote, this could be something completely different. The music could be set different. The prayer, completely different, right? And the other thing that's kind of interesting is there's ways to make this more interactive, and we haven't talked about ways to kind of monetize it. Someone, I think it was Nathan, mentioned like crypto and Web3, whatever. But for example, during this, and again, we could customize this, you could have sort of a virtual candle. You could say, hey, I really enjoyed this. I want to connect with the church on a deeper level. Or, hey, I want to donate. I understand that, it takes cost and resources to put these events on. So here's my Apple Pay, or here's my, crypto, or, whatever it is, right? I'm just going to tap my wrist and, donate something like that, right? So again, the idea is that things that would take you a long, hard time. I've talked to people about how long it takes for them to do this sort of thing in the real world. And the answer is a long time. You have to invite people, you have to bring coffee, you have to, whatever it is, put the tablecloth on. In a virtual environment, this can go much quicker. I could set this up with you guys in literally less than an hour, right? Like if something happened, God forbid, and you said something, we need to be out there tonight, we need something to happen tonight, I could make that happen. We could make that happen, right? And so the speed, the rapid response is another thing where kind of digital has sort of an advantage, if you will. So anyways, Will, does that like give you some sense of like the visuals and the pictures and like what it might look like, what it might feel like?
Yeah, that helps a lot with understanding what it actually would be like to use the product. I guess after this, the question that comes to mind is about how people virtually could interact with people in real life. If there's setup or mechanisms within the program in order to do that kind of thing.
So meaning, let me make sure I understood your question. Meaning if they connect virtually, how do we then connect them in real life?
Right. Like what I've encountered is that people who primarily interact with us virtually often feel isolated and disconnected, especially from the people who are able to connect in real life. It's not with everybody, but it's with some people. And so being able to interact with them, with people in real life who are there, would be a massive boon for them. And so that's why I was wondering if this type of programming or software has that, or if that's something that could be combined together with like a feed of it on a monitor or something like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's a strategic question. So let me give you a couple thoughts. So you could say virtual is the on-ramp for physical, right? Virtual is only interesting to me and us to the extent that it puts butts in seats on Sunday morning. You could say that, and we could try to customize the program around doing that, right? Or the other end of the spectrum would be to say, hey, listen, I'm going to respect people for where they are and how they roll. And if they want to stay virtual and never physically meet me for 35 years, God bless, that's okay. I will be there where they are. I will give them a digital virtual touch point that will support them, right? I've talked to people. I've talked to pastors. I've talked to pastors, here in Boston, and they've said, I've got like 30 people in upstate New York that just watch my stuff on YouTube. And I'm like, who are they? What do you know? What do you know about them? They're like, I have no idea. I have no idea who they are, what they are, why they are, what they need, what they're getting. Do they like it? But, they're there, right? So it's a really interesting question. I don't know the answer. So I don't have kind of a cut and paste answer to that. I could probably support kind of either path or something in between, but I think that's the kind of thing we'd want to test, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to alienate someone prematurely and say, you came here virtually, but unless you're here Sunday morning,
Yeah,
you're,
sorry, that's where I was going with that. It's not to try to get people in the seats. Oftentimes I encounter the sentiment from people who are shut-ins, who want to be there in person, who were there in person, and for various different reasons can no longer be there in person. And one of the things they deeply miss is that connection that they got on Sunday morning. That simple sense of sitting next to someone and being able to chat. And what I see from Solace is this great ability to gather in that virtual space and to have those types of moments and connections that are much more seamless and streamlined than, say, trying to type everything out in certain ways. But, when I think about a church that is living into a hybrid environment where it's both in real life and virtual, I'm wondering about those types of personal connections. So that's where my brain was going with all that.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's a good question. I mean, I would welcome feedback on that. I have probably more questions than answers, because I think it's an interesting question that, to be honest, none of us have really kind of figured out yet. So, it may be that the world is segmented, that some people say, hey, I roll dirt digitally and that's all I'm going to do. So don't mess around with that. And then other people are saying, I only do digital as sort of to your point, as kind of a stopgap until I can get there, or when I can get there, or I wish I could get there. And so we got to try and find some physical reinforcements for them. I don't know. I'm not trying to be evasive. I'm just saying It's a really interesting, wide-ranging question. I'm not sure I have a cookie cutter answer to it.
Well, that's part, Scott, of why I wanted to connect you and have some of our leaders see each other as well, because I don't think anybody has the answer to this right now. And that's what I'm hearing in many spaces is we're all trying different stuff, and it's going to be different for different people, but there is stuff out there to get and to understand. That's, you know, Nathan mentioned Second Life, and that's the thing that I always think about when I think about virtual church was, you know, people doing Confluent on Second Life 10 years ago. And that was, we really weren't ready for that now, but pandemic and technological advances, and as Will's saying, people who used to be able to come and can't, and they feel disconnected, and that's hard. And so is this a tool to, but that is that issue of, you know, people just watching and consuming content versus interacting and engaging in faith development and then discipleship. I think that's the rub that we're really struggling with, is how do we disciple people when we're virtual and it be a legitimate relationship.
That is very well articulated. That's a great point. I do think eventually we'll be able to replicate virtually a lot of the things that are happening today. Like, I've talked to people about what could it mean to have like a digital deacon or virtual deacon, right? I think that's going to be a thing. I think that will be real, right? And what those duties are and what that span of responsibility is, you know, I don't know. We'd have to think about it. Could we have virtual choirs where I'm singing from Boston and you're singing from Texas? Yep, I think that's coming too, right? You know, so I think the technology will provide for some more interesting answers to that very good question. What else?
So what are you imagining kind of the pricing structure to be? Because I'm noticing it, at least in the gathering at the table ministry, that we're seeing a huge uptick of people just connecting with us online. So I could see us trying this out just to see if the desire is there to meet in this way with those people. Because I'm kind of in the same situation. It's great that we have all these people viewing. I have no idea who they are. So this might be a way of kind of taking that next step to offer a different level of engagement for them, but also for us to make that connection online. So how are you imagining that pricing structure to work out for small communities?
Yep. So to confirm, do you mean what would be the costs to operate Solace, or what would be the cost to your end users?
Both. So both for an initial setup, say we wanted to try this, once a month online, but then if, what are we looking at for it to be out of pocket for people as well?
Yep. So let's take the second one first, because that one's a little harder. I have gotten very sort of mixed. Again, I'm going back to my journalism of talking to ministers and pastors and just sharing feedback with you. I have seen a real spectrum in response to that question you just asked. Some people say, this is great. This is a digital gold mine. I can now come up with very exciting, progressive, innovative new ways to monetize this beyond the pay what you think you should if you attend model we kind of have now, right? And so we could talk about subscriptions. We could talk about event fees. We could talk about kind of tokens, right? Where you create a community, a crypto Web3 community around a given church, and people have to buy in as a membership, like the way you would in a country, like a membership club, a country club, a golf membership or something like that, timeshare, whatever, right? So there's a lot of different models, kind of be careful what you wish for, a lot of different models that could be unleashed. So the answer is, we can pretty much do whatever you want us to do. My recommendation would be very gently, very subtly, test and learn as you go. First kind of establish some values, some stickiness, some community, and then start to think about ways to do that. But I think absolutely, my prediction when we meet in 10 years, my prediction is you will be pulling in more money virtually and digitally than you are in IRL, in the real world. I'll make that bet with all of you here. 10 years, you'll be making more virtually and digitally than you do in the real world. So the first question, easier part about what does Solace cost? So based on certain kind of pilots that we've been doing right now, we are thinking that this would eventually be sort of a software subscription model going forward. But for the foreseeable future, basically, if you want to do sort of like a real commercial pilot where we do real designs and you say, hey, I want that bush to be a little brown or not brown or whatever, that would be something like $5,000, right? To get into that one-time fee, just so that we can kind of create the environment, create some of the features that feel right to you, and then we can kind of get into it. If you're willing to kind of work with stuff that we've already developed and not customize it very much, I would be willing to do for 90 days or something like that. Just try some things out, small number of people, just kind of focus on feedback. I'd be willing to do that at no charge, just to test and learn. So.
It's okay. I'm just an IT specialist. I shouldn't. I should know how to work Zoom at this point too. I'd be willing to pilot it using the already existing kind of assets, just to see. Again, my primary demographic for my gathering at the table group is young adults, and most of them are gamers at this point. So I think if nothing else, it would give us some good insights. Maybe give you some good insights, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, there's a broader conversation that we would want to have. I mean, we have a whole discovery document where we find out more about, are we kind of focusing on a given church? We've kind of at more of a conference level, an association level, so there's kind of different levels of abstraction here. But I think the ideal situation would be to find a test that you're excited about, that you're interested in about. One of the questions I like to ask is, give me the group, the cohort, the demographic, whatever, that you feel most outraged that you should be reaching more of, right? Out-of-state college kids that used to go to church here all the time. Military, people in boot camp that used to come here, teens in the community, 80-year-olds down the street, social justice warriors. I'm just throwing stuff out now, but if we were kind of creating this like a marketing challenge, right, like a marketing case study, you'd say, hey, if I want to grow 20%, where am I going to get that growth from? You'd have some theory of the case, of the environment, of your market demand. You'd say, you know what? If more people knew about this, they'd be coming to me on Sunday morning. If more people could engage with me virtually, they would do that, whatever, right? So I think there's probably some upfront discovery where I'd want to kind of understand and learn a little bit more about sort of what's the problem that you think is most interesting to try and solve, and then see if we can kind of use technology to help out with that, right? As an example, that example I showed you on the prayer vigil, the digital vigil, that was because people kept talking to us and they said, we do something, and when we do those events, the draw is a different set of people than we see on Sunday morning. It's bigger, it's more robust, it's more wide ranging. Let's lean into that. Let's do more of that, right? So that's one of the reasons I created that. Why shouldn't church own social justice and community impact? Why shouldn't that be front and center? Why shouldn't when Lockney, Texas, when they think about, you know, social impact or something like that. Why shouldn't they think of church first? Right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, I think, Adam, this is part of why I was glad you could be a part of it, is I think your table ministry is a perfect example of a cohort that are inclined to this. And then how would that grow beyond Dallas?
Yeah, absolutely. Same. Great minds think alike, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I realize we've come to 11, and I know Nathan had a training to do, and I know others have things, but and Scott does. Any other questions for that question on pricing? I think that's the greatest anxiety for folks regarding any of this stuff as cost. One thing I would suggest to you on the call, and if anybody's watching this in the recording, we have a mission endowment fund, an NTNL, that is specifically intended to give grants to new things. And to Will's good question about older folks who used to come and can't, and how do we probably have to do some trainings and equippings, and that's going to take some one-on-one pastoral care and support, but maybe that's a role that a congregation would want to invest in if they had a cohort of folks who needed to be connected. I just think there's a lot of opportunity here, but it's very challenging for us in the day-to-day to get out of our heads in our space. I think about, we tried to do a hybrid NTNL convocation last year for leadership development, and it was good and it wasn't good. It was interesting. It was a thing. We want to get better at that kind of stuff because I think that's the future. And then talking about the further questions of how do you monetize it, and I think the stewardship aspect of that and just the sustainability aspect is something that we need to continue to grow and think about. Is how do we make these ministries sustainable? And Sunday morning giving is a declining resource right now, largely in many places. So what are the other avenues for connecting with? Veronica, Will, Chris, any other questions, thoughts for Scott?
I just so appreciate that you gave us this space and the opportunity to switch gears and kind of broadening. I will need to process this. I will go on your website and check out deeper what is this really about. So thank you for the inspiration.
Sure. Well, it's great feedback, great questions, and Eric, we can talk offline about potential next steps. But I understand that a lot of this is new and different and jarring, and it takes some different revs to kind of get there. I mean, I do this for a living, but I'm like I said, I've talked to people about whether they should get an iPhone or not. So I understand that some people are coming at this from a very different perspective, right? So it's good that you guys are thinking about it, and I'd love to be able to partner with you guys on a long-term basis.
Yep, definitely willing. I threw my email into the chat so you'd have it easily accessible, so we can connect when it works out for both of us.
Yeah, I'll send you, Scott, the email addresses of the folks on the phone. I think also on the website you can sign up. We're not endorsing anything per se. We're providing an option and an opportunity. And one of the things I know is that people like to see a model. And if we could get some models, some case study tests in the Synod, that would encourage people to try something else, because it's very difficult to be the first to really go after something. So I appreciate y'all's interest. Scott, really appreciate your time this morning, and that was very fruitful for me, and hope it was for y'all. And thank you so much for your interest and willingness.
All right, take care, everyone. Talk soon.
Thank you all.